What's up, everybody? Undad here. I've been meaning to start like a YouTube series, kind of similar to. I always loved the Laps Around Dollar End series that Fat Boss did, where they just like picked something and rambled about it for a while. And I've been meaning to do this for a while. I think I want to start this morning because we got into a conversation on stream yesterday about affixes, and I kind of wanted to just put all my thoughts in one place. So we're gonna give this a cheesy title. I'm going to call it Undad Unpacks. And today we are going to unpack Affix Imbalance in Mythic Plus. So just to talk about affixes quick, for anybody who doesn't do Mythic Plus a lot, the way affixes work is every key starting at +2 has either Fortified or Tyrannical on it, and that alternates week to week. Tyrannical being bosses are more difficult, and Fortified being trash is more difficult. Then at level 5, one affix is added. One of, what is in the 5 level? 5 different affixes. So at level 5, the key gets either Raging, Teaming, Bolstering, Sanguine, or Bursting. I'm not going to go into detail on that. You can find the information on those, or you just do keys, you'll see what they do. And then at level 8, or level 7 rather, so 5 it gets the first set, 7 it gets another affix, which is either Volcanic, Explosive, Grievous, Necrotic, or Skittish, or Quaking. So there's 6 options there. And then at level 10, for this season, for season 1 of BFA, which is the first raid, first season we've had, you get Infested. And Infested causes select mobs within the dungeon to be infested, and what that does is they have a healing aura, so they heal all the mobs that are within, it's like 10 yards around them, for a significant amount while they're alive, as well as when the infested mob dies, it spawns 2 spawns of Cahoon that will then try to reinfest into other existing mobs that you're in combat with, or not in combat with, but are close to. So you have to kill those spawns. And Infested was added in BFA. Previously to BFA, there was only 3 affixes. It was just the affixes I mentioned before, without Infested, and the order in which they were attached to keys was a little different. But we're going to talk about BFA for now, and the affix imbalance that exists, and how that's detrimental to Mythic Plus in general, and how I think it keeps people from getting into Mythic Plus, or it keeps people that are into Mythic Plus from playing as much as they would. Now, the past 2 weeks is kind of a perfect example of this. 2 weeks ago, we have what is called a push week, which is a set of affixes that allow you to push keys to kind of the highest possible limit given current gear levels, because the affixes are so manageable. And that week was Raging and Volcanic. Raging, Volcanic, Tyrannical. Now, with the tuning that Tyrannical and Fortified currently have in BFA, what I mean by tuning is how much health and how much damage is attached to whether either the trash or boss mobs, and how that affects how long a key takes or how difficult a key is. The general consensus for this expansion has been that Tyrannical is the easier week. Trash just hits too hard, trash is too scary, trash takes too long during Fortified weeks to quite push as hard, except for a few specific dungeons. We can talk about that later, but some dungeons are a little bit better for Fortified, but the majority of the 10 dungeons available are better during Tyrannical week. And that week, Raging is an affix that is manageable, that doesn't necessarily slow down the key, and doesn't keep you from pushing the key. It just causes mobs to enrage when they drop below 30%. So there's outplay potential, basically. There's a way you play around Raging, whether that be dispelling the buff with a Druid or Hunter, or kiting out mobs that become Raging so the tank doesn't die, or hard focusing them down when they do rage so that your tank doesn't take as much damage. And then there's Volcanic, which just randomly causes volcanic plumes to spawn underneath players, primarily ranged players, and then you move out of them or you take damage. Those are 2 affixes that obviously cause some, like, you have to play the game differently. They are punishing if you don't, but they don't inhibit your ability to complete keys at a high level. And then this past week, this is Tuesday morning, just about reset. So this past week of keys, the affixes were teaming, explosive, and fortified. Now, on their own, those 3 affixes are manageable. You could play around them, and it shouldn't inhibit your ability to push keys. However, the combination of those 3 with infested on top makes for a world in which 2 weeks ago, 20s and 21s were possible. Last week, we're scuffing 17s. And that's a huge discrepancy. That's 4 keystone levels from week to week. And what that does is that makes it so this community that wants to be playing the game to do Mythic Plus, like there's this huge community within World of Warcraft that their primary focus is Mythic Plus, and that's why they log on every day, has weeks that show up where they just don't want to play the game, or don't play the game, or they play alts just because it's too frustrating to play their mains during that week. And that's the week we had last week. Teaming obviously makes more trash exist, and trash is worth less count, so you have to kill more trash to get your 100%. Explosive makes it so that trash mobs have a random chance to spawn an explosive orb that needs to be killed before it finishes its channeled cast, or you take 50% of your max health and damage. And then you have fortified, which is causing the trash to just generally last longer and do more damage. Now, we're not even going to speak about infested yet, but infested is just there for both weeks. It's fine, whatever. But the way that those 3 affixes scale with each other is like they exponentially make each other harder. Teaming creates more trash. When there's more trash, more explosives spawn. When the explosives are fortified, it takes more of an investment to kill them. Now, halfway through the week, they nerfed explosive and they made them have half health, but that didn't make it easier to push keys because there's too much going on. Each affix is making the other affix more difficult. And normally I'm the kind of person that wants a higher difficulty in things, in the hopes that new players will really take the time to learn their classes, to complete this content, to get better at the game. But I think it needs to be consistent week to week, right? If you look at the affix schedule for this first season, there's 12 different combinations you can have, and maybe 3 or 4 of them are very good push weeks, and the other are just like obnoxious weeks. So that makes it so a third of the weeks are good and are fun, and especially from a PUG environment, because in a PUG environment especially, you need easier affixes in order to play. Otherwise, you just don't complete keys, people get frustrated, you're depleting 10s, and nobody wants to log on for that, right? Like, it was possible to just PUG 15s, 16s, maybe even 17s during the push week 2 weeks ago, and I played mostly alts last week, and even then 10s were a struggle. So what do you do to fix it? What do you clearly it's a problem that a big portion of the player base doesn't want to play every week. So how do you fix that? Now, Blizzard has already done some work in trying to nerf the problematic affixes. Like I said, they hit explosive last week where they nerfed the health. I don't think that was the correct way to nerf explosive. I think the correct way to nerf explosive was to make the frequency in which they spawn less, because explosive is already an affix that is super punishing if you don't deal with it correctly, right? So what you do to make that easier is, instead of making it easier to deal with, you make it so you deal with it less, in my opinion. Now, the nerf was good, it just wasn't what I was hoping for. Some other affixes that have been touched. Coming today, there was hotfix for Grievous to be nerfed. This week is bolstering Grievous Tyrannical coming up. Now, the way Grievous perk worked previously is every time you dropped below, anyone in the group dropped below 90% HP, you get a stacking debuff on you that would be removed once you're healed back above 90% HP. And previously, it was 1.5% of your max health per tick. And every tick, it would gain a stack up to a maximum of 5. So after 5 ticks, you would be at 5 stacks of the debuff, equaling what is 5 times 1.5? 7.5% of your max HP per tick, and that would need to be healed off. Now the change that they're making is it's now 2% per tick, but it stacks up every other tick rather than every tick. So after 5 seconds, that would have stacked up to 3 stacks, so you'll be taking 6% of your max HP per tick rather than 7.5. But then if it remains on, it'll eventually stack up to 10% of your max HP. Now what this does is it rewards healers for clearing Grievous early, makes it easier to clear Grievous early, and it hard punishes healers that don't clear Grievous early. Now, we haven't played the keys, so I can't say from experience whether I think the change is good, but in theory, I think that's a good change to Grievous. I think the biggest problem with Grievous is that everybody in the group takes a big AoE damage that's unavoidable. You now have to top everybody before they all get 5 stacks, and typically in that situation, at least one player, usually 2, is getting to 5 stacks before you have the global cooldowns available to fix it. So now you actually have the ability to fix Grievous. What are the other nerfs that they made? There was something else that I'm missing here. That was... Oh, they changed the way that bursting works. Bursting is now, I think, half as lethal as it was. I don't have it available here right now, but it went from... It was like 4% max HP per tick or something, and there were 2 ticks involved, or 3 ticks, and they made it so it's 4% max HP for the duration of the bursting debuff. Something like that. I'll have to pull it up some other time. But bursting is not... I think bursting is a currently balanced affix, so that nerf was... What are you going to do? Now, they could continue to nerf the problematic affixes here, right? And they take the difficult ones and make them easier, which I think they've touched most of the difficult. I think the difficult ones are explosive. I think Grievous was an issue. I think teaming and fort are issues right now. Teaming and fortified are issues in the way that dungeons work, but I don't see how they nerf teaming. And I guess they could nerf the numbers on fortified, and that's great. But does that make... Do those nerfs, if they nerf teaming and fortified, do those nerfs make it so that these combinations of affixes are closer to each other? And I don't think that they do. I think if I were the guy in charge of figuring out how to balance Mythic Plus, and I were trying to make it so that weeks seemed equally fair, so that every week I logged on, I knew I could maybe push keys higher than I had the previous week, and I wasn't punished for not being around during the good push weeks. If I were going to do that, I think the solution is to remove 1 affix. Now, if we look back at Legion, we had 3 affixes. There was no seasonal, so there was no infested, which made the affix combinations that currently exist in the game a little bit more manageable. You still had push weeks in Legion. And I didn't play enough in Legion, honestly, to know, so I'm not really doing a one-to-one comparison. Just using this as something to bounce off of. But there was always only 3 affixes. So now we have 4, which compounds the difficulty here. But I think if you remove one of the level 5 and one of the level 7 affixes, that's how you make Mythic Plus enjoyable every week. So now where you're at, so say it's now Raging Tyrannical week, or it's Skittish Fortified week, with Infested on all these, and the new seasonal affixes as well will be on all these. You're now in a situation where you have all the affixes require you to play around them in order to succeed, but you're not limited in how high you push by the small affixes. And by small, I mean the ones that are given at level 5 and level 7. The things that are limiting you from pushing keys is Tyrannical and Fortified, which is making the timer difficult on keys, which is, I think, the way that it should. I think the general population of Mythic Plus runners would be much happier with the state of Mythic Plus if your keys were... your ability to time keys capped out with key level and Tyrannical and Fortified, rather than just sometimes you get a combination of affixes that makes the dungeon so slow that you cannot finish, or you can't pull in a way that allows you to finish in time, or Explosive just wipes your ass on some dumb pull that has to exist. Like, especially teaming in explosive week, you have some pulls that are just like 6 mobs. Like, you cannot avoid it. It's a 6 mob pull with explosive, which makes things difficult. Sometimes you get a random set. Sometimes randomly all 6 mobs spawn an explosive at the same time, and sometimes that same 6-pack. Oh man, server reset, so I won't be able to look off MDT. We'll do this from the top now. Sometimes you get a pack where all 6 mobs will spawn explosive at the same time, and now you have to deal with them, and you're forced to split focus away from the mobs, and the pack lives long enough that like now your tank's dead. And sometimes that same 6-pack will just not spawn any explosive, and there's no rhyme or reason to it, which is another thing. I think randomness in affixes doesn't really have a place, but it's significantly less impactful, less evident, less frustrating if you have a week that's just explosive, or you have a week that's just teaming, or you have a week that is just raging. Knowing that we talked about this yesterday too, and I think there would need to be some of the easier affixes would need to be re-looked at, or maybe removed or replaced with something else if this were the case. I think the 2 problematic ones would be Volcanic and Skittish, because if they're the only affix, they're very easy to deal with. And I think the way that you do that is you maybe consider replacing Skittish with something else, and you maybe increase the impact of Volcanic. So you make it so if you do stand in a Volcanic, it does more damage than it currently does, so you're punished harder. Now, even though like people speak about Volcanic as if it's a non-affix, we had plenty of keys scuffed during push week due to the wrong person eating a Volcanic at the wrong time, not being able to res. And now that key, that 20 that we're going to time, is now just, all right, we'll do it on 19 and we'll get a new 20. Like, we're not timing this anymore. So maybe you just keep Volcanic as is. Like, Volcanic is still, like, it's still something you have to deal with. So is this a change that I think will be made? No. I think that would be something that would be made during an expansion transition, and that's upsetting to me, right? Like, I wish there was a world in which this would happen mid-expansion. But I guess, I don't know, maybe you get enough people talking about it, and they're like, oh man, maybe this is a good idea. And then there's the argument that this makes keys too easy. And I think that argument's ridiculous. I don't think that removing an affix makes the keys too easy, because they're infinitely scaling content. So eventually, even if you take all the affixes away, you're gonna hit a wall where the keys just aren't done. But what removing an affix does is it makes it before you hit that wall, the keys become easier, which allows more players to get into keys, or it allows casual players that like have not learned the dungeons, because BFA dungeons are very difficult, right? There's a lot of coordination that goes along with a lot of the trash packs that exist, and even some of the bosses that differentiates BFA dungeons from Legion dungeons. Like, a lot of Legion dungeons, you could just kind of like outgear and man mode your way through and not be punished regardless of the affixes, whereas BFA, that doesn't exist. BFA, the dungeons are more complex. The trash mobs have more shit going on. Most pulls, you're limited by the amount of kicks you have more than anything, which is partially factored by the fact that Arcane Torrent is no longer what it was in BFA, and also factored just by dungeon design. Like, there's too many spooky casts, and maybe not too many. There's a lot of spooky casts, and those things tend to be what limit your ability to push keys rather than the affixes. The affixes are just there to make it so you either log on this week or you don't, because you're either gonna have fun or you're not. And fixing that imbalance by getting rid of the double stack of like the garbage affixes, like this past week, teaming explosive, for example, I think does a lot. Because if we look at push week is Raging Volcanic. Those are affixes you had to play around. But the limiting factor in pushing that week was Tyrannical, and running out of time to finish the keys at a certain level because of just like the sheer length that bosses took, or the amount of like you had to pull trash in very big packs in order to have the time to fix. And then that allows for more mistakes that are totally separate from Raging and Volcanic. While you're still playing around Raging and Volcanic, the mistakes exist regardless of those affixes. And I think that allows for more enjoyable gameplay. I think a lot of people had a lot of fun playing Mythic Plus because they were able to to queue up for a random plus 10, plus 11, plus 15 maybe, and be confident that they were going to complete it in time, rather than this stressful environment for a more casual Mythic Plus runner where there's just so much shit on their plate. Like there doesn't need to be that in order for the game type to be enjoyable. So I could ramble on this forever. I probably already have rambled on further than I needed to. But I hope this new series is something that I keep up with. I hope that I find new things to talk about and just kind of rant on. I'm curious about what you guys think. You leave comments below. Like the video if you want more content like this. I also do intend to do some like rogue specific stuff for everybody who's interested in help in playing rogue in their Mythic Plus keys. And that's that. So I'll see you guys on stream. I'll link that below, and the add-on I was looking at, Mythic Dungeon Tools, for you to have all this information on keys. I'll link that in the description below as well. So have a great day, guys. I'll catch you around.